everyone. Welcome to the Backstage Classical Career Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Katrina Stroud, and I'm a classical violinist who started playing at the age of 3. I graduated from the Robert McDuffie Center for Strings at Mercer University with my bachelor's in violin performance, and I'm pursuing my master's in music at the University of Michigan. In this series, I invite esteemed classical musicians onto the show and interview them to tell their stories and give advice to share with others and preserve their legacies. Welcome to the final episode of Season 1. This has been such an incredible journey, and I want to say a heartfelt thank you to all of my interviewees and listeners for making this podcast possible. I'd also like to give a special shout out to Wesley O'Brien for helping me so much with this podcast and connecting me with his teacher at Juilliard for this season finale, Misha Amory. Since winning the 1991 Naumburg Viola Award, Misha Amory has been an active soloist, chamber musician, and pedagogue. He has performed with orchestras in the United States and Europe and has released a recording of the Hindemith Sonatas on the Musical Heritage Society label. Mr. Amory performs as a member of Yale's ensemble in residence, the Brentano String Quartet, which was formed in 1992 and has received numerous accolades, including the prestigious Naumburg and Cleveland Quartet Awards. Mr. Amory holds degrees from the Yale University and the Juilliard School, and his principal teachers were Heidi Castleman, Caroline Levine, and Samuel Rhodes. He has taught viola at the State University of New York Stony Brook and was a visiting resident at the San Francisco Conservatory. Mr. Amory currently serves on the faculties of the Juilliard School and the Curtis Institute. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today. I'm so honored to have you with me today. So when did you first start playing the viola, and what drew you to the instrument initially?
Okay, well, probably like a large number of our tribe. I became a violist from originally playing the violin. I was a violinist until my teenage years, and then I started playing the viola at about 16 or 17. At the time, I was a composer, and I think I had an inherent interest in how inner voices work and, the kind of opening up the back of the machine and getting in there with my tools. And I will confess that there was a girl who played the viola. And when you're 16 years old, that's important. So maybe she also inspired me. And I thought that maybe, again, I think this is probably a common story. I think that, like many violinists, I thought maybe I would add the viola and maybe play both. But then my violin teacher heard me and said, you're really much more naturally suited to this instrument than to the violin. And so she more or less kindly kicked me out of her studio and made me find like a proper viola teacher at that point. And so kind of without realizing it at first, I was a violist.
I see.
And that's kind of where I've stuck ever
Yeah.
since.
And going back a little further, when did you start playing the violin?
About 6 years old,
Okay.
something like that. Even before that, I'd studied the piano, but maybe this is one of the limitations of my brain. It seemed unreasonable to me at that age to be expected to do one thing with my right hand and a totally different thing with my left.
Yes.
And so I was granted the wish to switch to something where the two hands were collaborating on the same task.
I see. And so who were some of your musical mentors growing up, and what eventually drew you to the Yale School of Music and Juilliard for college?
Well, just for the record, I was actually an undergraduate at Yale. I never went to the School of Music
Oh, I see.
there, but then I did do my graduate work at Juilliard. I will say this, my first year out of high school, I went to the Eastman School of Music to study with Heidi Castleman, who was and has been a very important lifelong mentor to me. And my parents, like many parents, very much cared about the idea of me going to a college rather than a conservatory. And so they sort of got me to promise that if they let me go to Eastman for 1 year, then I would then agree to go to Yale and be sort of a college-y student for the rest of my time. And so that seemed like a pretty good deal to me. But much though I enjoyed my time at Yale, I would say that my most wonderful undergraduate year was at Eastman. I loved the culture there. I loved making music. It kind of felt like music camp all year. And it was a really fun time. So I'll never forget that year. Then I was at Yale, and it's funny, you go to college, but if you're a music head, then you still end up doing kind of music all around the clock. And,
Yeah.
many colleges have lots of music culture going on, and you can find your people and be doing just as much music making as if you were at conservatory, so that it's not as black and white, I think, as a lot of young students imagine.
I
It
see.
would be that
Mhm.
choice, as you no doubt already know.
Yes.
Um, so that was important to me. What really drew me to Juilliard was the Juilliard Quartet, and I was, growing up a big fan of theirs and had all their recordings and listened to them undyingly. And so I wanted to study with Sam Rhodes, who was the then and longtime violist in the Juilliard Quartet, and I wanted to coach the Juilliard Quartet. And I was a big admirer of Joel Krosnick, who we just lost last year, and Robert Mann, who was, kind of this immortal of 20th century string quartet playing. And
Mhm.
so basically, I wanted to kind of bask in their presence. And
Yeah,
that's what drew me to Juilliard. It was kind of a chamber music choice for me, really.
I see. And speaking of chamber music and being drawn by the Juilliard Quartet, was playing in a quartet something you always wanted to do? What were your career aspirations when you were in college?
By the time I was in college, I pretty much knew I wanted to be in a quartet. For me, the choice to become a violist and the wish to play in a string quartet were more or less simultaneous.
Mm.
Like, sort of deciding to play the viola in my head, spoken or unspoken, it meant, well, I'm going to be a violist provided that I can play in a string quartet.
Yeah.
And so my love of the string quartet literature and my love of the viola are very much intertwined and, to a certain extent, unentangleable from each other.
Mhm.
So it was really from those high school years, it was pretty much, well, okay, it's going to be quartet for me.
Yeah.
Um, and that was very simple for me. And I would say that compared to many quartet players, that was a relatively early decision. Like the decision or the desire to be in a quartet for sure comes, I would say, a little later for most people.
I
But
see.
everybody would have a different answer about that kind of that was how it kind of fell out for me.
Yeah. And then, speaking of quartet, when did the Brentano Quartet form, and where does the name come from?
Okay, well, that second question is perhaps simpler, and it has a simpler answer. Brentano, the provenance of the name Brentano is Antonia Brentano was a friend and patron of Beethoven's.
Mm.
She was his piano student. Many think that he was in love with her at one point or another. I'm inclined to think that he was more in love with her family's money, if you ask me, but certainly she was an ardent supporter of his, and she was part of the same Brentano clan that includes Clemens Brentano, who was an important poet and philosopher in the German 19th century, and it was altogether a very cultured family. And so I think we chose the name for a few practical reasons. It's easy to spell, easy to pronounce. Nobody else had the name, which is a surprisingly important and difficult box to check when you're thinking of a name for your group.
Yes.
And we thought, that if Beethoven liked Brentano, then maybe that would mean that he would like us too. And Beethoven, like, he's a big deal for string quartets.
Yes.
His quartets are so central to what we do. So to us, it seemed to be very much to the point to choose that name. So
Mhm.
those are kind of the combined reasons.
Yeah.
How did we start? So many of us sort of wound up at Juilliard at around the same time. Mark Steinberg and Serena Cannon and I were all graduate students there at about the same time. This would be in the early 90s.
Mhm.
And so, chamber music world is not very big. Like, one person talks to another, you have a friend who knows so and so, and like, it gets around the grapevine. Oh, we'd like to be a quartet and we're looking for a cellist. And, we read with a few cellists at that time. And, it takes fits and starts. It's not like a quartet just forms and it's good to go.
Right.
Two of us started with a different other two people the previous year, and it was a total disaster. We all respected each other and liked each other's playing, but sitting down and rehearsing those four people, it didn't work.
Mhm.
And so it just kind of fell apart, right? And then we sort of thought we were done, but two of us decided we'd like to try this again, and it was sort of the second attempt on our parts that turned into what became the Brentano Quartet. But it was very these things are never like a slam dunk
Mhm.
when you start. You have to try and you have to like all agree that this is important to you and it's even important enough maybe to sometimes forego other tempting professional opportunities that might come up around the same time. And you kind of have to say, we're really going to try this.
Mhm.
You know, kind of on faith for a while, like not knowing that it's going to work and not knowing that even if it works well between the four of you, that the rest of the world will like you
Yeah.
enough for it to be viable. It's just, you sort of have to take things on faith for 2 or 3 years. And so it was, we were all living there and we were making sure we had enough time to work together and try to get our word of our group out. It was quasi pre-internet. The internet was just kind of beginning around then.
Mm.
Um,
Mhm.
the term web browser was not like a word that any of us knew. Like, to give
Yeah.
you some idea, we didn't have email addresses yet. Our first year of existence, so it was right kind of around that time, that point,
Interesting.
right? So
Mhm.
we were lucky. I mean, there were a few influential people who were kind of in our corner and were spreading word on our behalf. And, we worked at other things, but it was something that we were able to do more and more kind of as our main thing within 3 or 4 years. And I would say that that's relatively fast. And therefore, I would say that we were relatively lucky.
Yeah. And who were some of those influential people in your corners, as you mentioned?
Well, we certainly owe a great debt of gratitude to the pianist Mitsuko Uchida, who was someone who really went to bat for us, especially in Europe, like bringing us to Wigmore Hall and to our first European management, and playing a little bit with us and spreading the word on her end. The New York composer Bruce Adolph, who is part of the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, kind of brought us in to do a lot of work there, partly educational outreach, partly new music, and he also was very kind of ardent on our behalf. The Juilliard Quartet, who were all mentors of us and coached us in the early days, were certainly advocates of ours. So, between these people, I feel that we were very lucky, and they spread the word and sent all the audio cassettes around to everyone to listen to, and that's kind of how things gradually started to get off the ground.
Yeah, amazing. And are there any memorable performances from this quartet, or do you have any funny stories to share from the quartet?
Oh, no doubt. Well, I mean, the funny one of the funniest stories for me is we were playing some little concert in a relatively small venue. I don't even honestly remember where it was. It could have been in upstate New York or Long Island, but somehow the way that hall was, there was a sort of a glass partition that separated the offstage from onstage, and we took our bow after a piece and we went off, and the door clicked shut behind us, and we couldn't open it again. And then the audience was sitting there clapping their hands and they were watching us. And we were just standing there, like pulling on the door. And it was an extremely awkward, but kind of unforgettable situation where
Yeah,
they knew we wanted to come out and they were clapping, but, and eventually they kind of gave up because are you going to keep clapping when it's clear that we're not coming back on stage for the
right.
foreseeable future? That was certainly a kind of unforgettable time
Yeah.
for us. Lots of things have happened to us over the years. There was another time when I kind of feel like I'm telling you about all these fails that happened, but those are usually the funny things, aren't they?
Yes.
Um, there was one time, the only concert that we've never turned up for. We were booked to perform in Sun Valley, Idaho, and somehow the easiest fare or the best fare for us was to fly to Atlanta from New York and then fly to Sun Valley from there.
Okay.
And the incoming plane to New York before we were going to board it got struck by lightning
Oh, wow.
such that the plane was apparently fine but had to be taken out of commission,
Mm.
and there wasn't another one, and so that first flight was canceled, and we couldn't get to Atlanta until several hours later, and we got there, we'd missed our connection, and it was President's Day weekend, which means that everybody was traveling and there were no flights for the foreseeable future, and so even though it was the morning of the day before the concert, we had to let the presenter know that we were not in Sun Valley and we were not coming to Sun Valley,
Yeah.
and we have never been invited back. I think they took that amiss, which, I don't blame them, but we truly turned over every rock to try and
Right.
figure out a way to get there. And it was simply not going to happen. So we flew to Atlanta, we ate lunch, and then we flew back to New York. And that was our day. That was the end of the story for us. So um, sad, sad, but true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because you're in Ann Arbor, am I correct?
Yes.
I can tell you an Ann Arbor story
Mhm.
as well, which is that there was some point where I should back up and say we've had one personnel change in our 34-year existence. So our first 6 years, we were with one cellist, Michael Cannon, and he left because he missed spending more time with his family. And at that point, Nina Lee joined our group. And this would have been about 2009, 2010. We were supposed to play a concert in Ann Arbor. And a couple of days before, we played in Baltimore, and Nina started getting a stomach ache. And she said it must have been that burrito I had for lunch. And she was getting worse and worse, and she was coughing in a strange way. And then that night, she went to New York Hospital and had an appendectomy.
Oh,
It
wow.
was her appendix. And after you get your appendix out, you don't go to get on a plane and
Yeah.
perform a concert. And so that's the advantage of having a spare cellist. We were able to call Michael and ask him if he would jump in. And
Wow.
the folks at the University Music Society were very understanding and they allowed us to come with Michael. And and I told everyone that Nina had her appendix out during the night. And the first question I got back was, did they get the burrito? Turned out not to be relevant, but at first we thought it was the burrito. Yeah. So Yeah, so I mean, like last minute people jumping in can happen. It's something that you try to avoid as a quartet, but in a way, it kind of felt like we were having our cellist replace our cellist. So
Yeah.
it was, kind of a special case.
Yeah, worked out.
So this can happen. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, probably our favorite place to play, for all time remains Wigmore Hall in London, which is not a very original choice, but it is it's an amazing sounding quartet hall, as everybody says. And it's
Mhm.
funny, no matter what you sound like as a quartet, and quartets can sound quite different and have very different tastes in sound, it's an almost universal opinion that it's a perfect quartet hall. So there
Wow.
must be something special about that place.
Mhm.
And you're in the green room, and they have all these photos like dating back 100 years or more about of people who played there, and so it's a place which is kind of steeped in its own lore and history, and that's, I would say, a very special place.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe the most unusual place we've played was many years ago, maybe 2000 or 2001. We were asked to join a rather large band of musicians to accompany the soprano Jessie Norman, playing a kind of mixed bag of things, including jazz and gospel and classical music, all like this book. And we were invited to play with her in an ancient Greek amphitheater not far from Athens. And it's a place that
Wow.
seats 14,000 people. And it's one of these sort of acoustical marvels where you stand in the back row and someone whispers a word from the middle of the amphitheater and you can hear everything.
Right.
Um, so there she was singing, and 12,000 people came out to hear her perform. And we were all
Wow.
kind of sitting there, like, along with 20 other people who were playing along with her. And it was, not your typical quartet concert for sure,
Yeah.
but it was certainly unforgettable.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
it was one of her farewell concerts, I want to say,
I
maybe.
see.
Yeah, at that point.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all those. And
Sure.
you said you've been together as a quartet for 34 years. How do you think the quartet has kind of changed over time, if it has?
It's changed enormously. I mean, I could perhaps start by saying naming a few of the ways in which it hasn't changed, which
Mhm.
I think our relationship with each other was blessed at the outset by having a few sort of indispensable qualities. One of which is that we trusted each other. We trusted each other to show up, to be good and honest about money matters, to give each other slack and give each other the benefit of the doubt when we got out of bed, on the wrong side of bed, and when we were in foul mood. There could be lots of non-quartet reasons that might be so, and just sort of having belief that the other three people were for real, that they were quality people, and that they you know, wouldn't turn into maniacs or be jerks forever, like maybe a jerk for a day, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and that's it's funny, like almost I would almost rank those things as more important than musical compatibility even, or
Mm.
more important than your command of your instrument, or your musical insight. Those things are important too, no doubt about it. But just to feel like you can depend on three other people
Mhm.
to be a certain kind of person and to be honest and to be reliable, and to love them.
Yeah.
This is huge. And I would say that hasn't changed over 34 years. Like we still have faith in each other. In every other way, I would say we've changed. At the beginning, we rehearsed 6 or sometimes even 7 days a week, usually for 4 hours a day, and
Wow.
we needed that. We needed to learn each other. We needed to learn our materials. We needed to figure out how it is that you go about putting an interpretation on a piece of music together, and that takes time. And what we really needed to do a lot in the early days, maybe more than was wise, is we needed to talk
Mm.
in
Mhm.
in rehearsal. We needed to explain in words what we saw, and like to a certain extent, that was more necessary at the beginning, as I'm sure many music students have heard from their coachings. It's maybe best if you can communicate with fewer words. And that was something that was because words can be misleading as often as they're clarifying. Everyone
Mhm.
understands something different, and it's easy to get the verbosity disease and to talk your head off and to be no closer to an understanding than you were at the beginning.
Mhm.
So we've learned to listen more, especially when playing, and to talk less. But I mean, of course, we also know each other's preferences and proclivities much more now than we used to. And so to a certain extent, those words are unnecessary now.
Mhm.
And nowadays I would say we rehearse 4 days a week for maybe 2.5 hours. And that
Mhm.
doesn't include when we're traveling, right? So it's
Yeah.
we rehearse less, we're able to rehearse far more efficiently, which, you would hope for after having practiced this thing for 34 years. You would hope that we've managed to streamline certain processes
Mhm.
a little bit better. And, you know, I think what we're on our guard against is that, it's the more you're playing with the same three people, it's easy to sort of get hardened into your positions,
Mhm.
for a sort of callus to grow over your MO and for a callus to go over the group's MO. This can all happen. And we always try to stay open and listening and alive to
Mhm.
what we're doing. And we do discover that when we come back, I mean, by this time, there are many pieces of the standard repertoire that we've returned to multiple times, with several years break in between. We play it in the year 2006, in the year 2012, not, in last year, right?
Yeah.
And we come back to it and we find it to be a very different piece in our hands.
Mm.
And there were a couple of pieces early on which were for us really bad experiences. We couldn't reconcile our points of view on the piece, and it just ended up. But then we were booked to perform it 12 times, so we just had to suffer through it. And we all kind of vowed to ourselves, we're never going to play that piece again. That piece is on the no-fly list. And then 22 years later, we came tiptoeing back to it and thought, well, it's such a great piece. How can we not try again? And often we were pleasantly surprised that we'd all changed
Mm.
and maybe become more forgiving, or maybe inadvertently moved closer together in our ways of looking at the piece. And it was a happier experience the second time.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that can happen too. But
Yeah.
it is kind of proof that we're not standing still. It's almost, I mean, I think it's impossible for an artist to stand still.
Yeah.
Like, even if you don't want to change, you're gonna.
Yeah.
Our cells are replacing themselves,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, same with the cells of a string quartet, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. And the Brentano has had such an amazing career and has been so influential for the string quartet world. So thank you for everything that you've done for that group and in that group.
Our pleasure.
So you're one of the very few people who have won the Nomberg competition as both a soloist and in a string quartet. So how did those two competition experiences differ, and what career opportunities came out of them for you?
Well, the competitions, like, yeah, the solo competition and the quartet competition, they might as well have been two totally different organizations.
Mm.
The experiences were quite different. I was younger when I won the solo competition, which was in the early 90s. And there were many rounds, and there was a lot of angst, and there was, anxiety, and my friends were all doing it too. And
Mm.
my eventual wife, Sinian Huang, was in the finals with me, but I didn't know her yet.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was sort of a weird little fact. But it was perhaps one could say closer to what you think of as a standard competition experience. Like, you
Mhm.
needed a certain amount of repertoire, you used different repertoire in different rounds, you did your best to stay even and to try to, like, put a good face on everything.
Yeah.
At one point, I think I was playing and I was wearing a tie, as we all did back then, and the tie somehow got tangled up with my bow arm, and
Oh,
it was
no.
really distracting. And then I asked them for permission to take my tie off for the next piece, which was granted, fortunately, because I just didn't seem to be able to make it work. But yeah, so, like, it was really nice. It gave my name a handle, I suppose.
Mm.
I didn't really honestly think in my heart of hearts that I was going to try to be a viola soloist, but
Mm.
getting that kind of recognition opened certain doors for you, and in a certain way, it led to Heidi Kasselman, like, bringing me in to teach with her at Juilliard, which kind of was the beginning of my whole teaching career, which has become enormously important to me. And so I
Mhm.
sort of feel like I owe that, at least in part, to the Melbourne competition.
Wow.
The quartet competition happened 3 or 4 years later, and it was a weird experience because, I mean, there was only one live round, and
Hmm.
bizarrely, there were only three groups competing in that live round,
Hmm.
and two groups won.
Oh, wow.
So, like, in that case, like, I think you can say that we had good chances of winning because both groups won.
Yeah.
We won, and there was a new music group that shared the prize with us, and so
Mhm.
it was so chill. It was like, we met and we went and we played some of our music for them, and 15 minutes later, it was done, and we were able to leave. But it almost just felt like a nice thing to do on an afternoon. Going to American Recital Hall in New York and playing for some people, some of whom we knew.
Yeah.
And but it was good. It was good, of course. When you're a young quartet, you need a few handles to your name. You need a presenter to say, well, okay, who are these people and why should I have them play on my series? Oh, I see they won, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Okay, like we all think in terms of our resume, you need some line items, and so it served that way. But I mean, as a result, we've also been very close to the Naumburg Foundation, and they're celebrating their 100th birthday this year,
Oh,
and
wow.
we're taking part in the celebration, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And it kind of hooked us, connected us to a number of other people who have won over the years. And we've worked with Dawn Upshaw, for example, who's a wonderful soprano who won, in her year and et cetera, et cetera. And so,
Yeah.
we respect the organization. We value our connection to it.
Yeah, for sure. You talked a little bit about starting to teach. When did you first start teaching and finding that passion for teaching and realizing you were good at it?
Well, I mean, I ask myself if I'm good at it every day. I must say, like, you're only as good a teacher as the chemistry between you and that student allows you to be,
Mhm.
something that I've learned gradually. But yeah, I mean, it kind of started with that. I was just out of school, having got my master's degree, and I was fortunate enough to be Sam Rhodes' assistant teacher
Mm.
my first year after school. And then I kind of wasn't teaching much. And then the Juilliard School hired Heidi Castleman to come and be on their viola faculty. But Heidi was happily living with her husband in Sarasota, Florida. And
Okay.
so she was kind of like, why would I fly to New York every week to teach the viola, much though I love teaching? And they said, well, what if you partnered with someone? And she said, fine, have Misha Amory come and teach every other week, and I'm willing to come twice a month. And that was
Mm.
so I came on kind of as her assistant for a year, and then she waved her magic wand and told them to make me a viola faculty member after that,
Yeah.
basically, because she said so. Uh,
Wow.
and so it was wonderful. Like I was able to it was actually kind of perfect for me because I was not an experienced teacher at that point, but I was able to teach as the only teacher in the room, and I was able simultaneously to observe Heidi's teaching,
Mm.
and to
Mhm.
see what she would do. And it's great, as a young teacher, it's great to be able to watch an older teacher teach because you're watching a person play and you're making a little mental list of what you think you might do if you were
Mhm.
to, and then you kind of see what the other more experienced teacher does, and you sort of compare, and
Yeah.
you deepen your own instincts, and
Mhm.
you're scribbling notes, and you're noticing what they do, and it was a real gift that she gave me. It was even better than someone just handing you a teaching job all by yourself.
Right.
Like, she was kind of able to allow me to indenture myself,
Yeah.
to work sort of alongside her, and we would talk about the students, and I would get her insight just, in our conversations as well. It was a wonderful training period for me, and so that was, how I started doing it. And I mean, I don't know, do you teach any at all? Do you teach
I do a little bit,
I bet you
yes.
do, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I bet you wouldn't disagree with the idea that when someone's playing and you're like, "What did my teacher tell me when I had this problem?"
Oh, yeah.
And, like, you avail yourself of all kinds of wonderful, helpful moments that you recall from your own study days, right? And
Yes.
it's,
Mhm.
or you can even go to your teacher and say, "What do I do if my student can't do such and such?" And
Right.
they can tell you on the spot what they would do, right? So
Mhm.
it's a little bit, there's a reason one speaks of a teaching lineage or a teaching genealogy, because of course we're always reaching back in our own memories and figure out, like,
Mhm.
what did this teacher do or that teacher? And I had 3 or 4 viola teachers as I was going through school, I feel like I've been able to make use of what each of them has told me. That's kind of how you get started with the
Yeah.
teaching, and then, like, gradually you start having your own little stockpile of things that you tried and it worked, but
Mhm.
you never lose what your teachers tried on you
Yeah.
as well.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, you're currently part of a unique four studio combination at the Juilliard School called the Oct. And for people who don't know what that is, it's the Amory, Castleman, Huang, and Tenenbaum studio at Juilliard. So, how did that begin, and what advantages does it give to the students?
It is unusual, and I would say probably, I mean, maybe it dates to before this, but it feels to me like the whole concept of team teaching or of one student studying with two teachers started to become a thing maybe in the 90s.
Okay.
And nowadays, I would say it's quite common. Would you agree? Like,
Yeah.
at lots of schools, you'll see students who have more than one teacher.
Mhm.
Um, it's good for some students. It's not so good for other students. Some students are made to study with one teacher and do the best that way, and other students get a lot out of sort of the shared situation. With
Mhm.
the Ox Studio, nobody in our studio actually has more than two instrumental teachers.
Mhm.
But when we have studio class, anyone who studies with any of the four of us, Steve, Heidi, Sinian, and myself, are expected to attend that. So, which, makes it actually kind of a big blob of students. It's 30
Yeah.
students or more
Wow.
in any given year. So it's a big, kind of friendly shared studio
Mhm.
that way. And we enjoy it. I mean, it started really, I would say, owing to Heidi's insatiable appetite for teaching, because she started with me at Juilliard and we had 9 students. And then the next year we had 12 students. And then once it got up around 16 students, I had to say to Heidi, I can't keep up with you. I can't teach this many. My quartet is starting to travel. I would be doing a poor job if I was teaching on too little sleep or if I was getting kind of overwhelmed. And so then she started asking other people. First, she asked Sinyon to join us, and Sinyon had a few students. And then it got to be too much for me and Sinyon. So a few years after that, she brought Steve Tenenbaum in. And then that seems to turn out to be enough. And at the
Mm.
beginning, it was Heidi was teaching everybody.
Wow.
And the three of us, were puffing and panting and each teaching like a third of her students. And gradually, we were teaching some students outside of Heidi, and like it started to kind of diversify that way.
I see.
So I mean, it's great at the studio class. Students all who are performing always get to play for someone who's not their teacher, and like we kind of cross pollinate that way, and the
Yeah.
students support each other, and we've kind of built up a little bit of a budget over the years, and so we can bring in outside experts to do
Mm.
guest presentations, talk about HP, talk about scales, talk about orchestra excerpts, other things. We've had a neurologist come in and talk about how the brain influences like different aspects of our performing and
Yeah.
what can go wrong or so I mean
Wow.
it's an interesting thing. We have studio recitals through the year that's kind of there are more formal things for works in progress, a bunch of stuff. So we love it. It's really big. So we have to I think we have to make sure that our students are not melting into the wallpaper and that everyone's staying involved
Yeah.
and, very much kind of like actively engaging in the
Yeah.
endeavor. But one thing that I will say that I've said to lots of students, including prospective ones, that has gotten better and better over the years is that I love that group of people.
Mm.
There may be like 300,000 of them, but I kind of feel like at this point, like everyone in the room is just like a person I'm so glad is there. And I know that they're safe with each other. There aren't
Yeah.
backbiting kinds of people or spiteful people or whatever. Like they're smart, they're humorous, they're supportive, they're like, complete human beings. And I'm kind of proud of us I mean, it started out and it was okay, but it's gotten really good that way
Yeah.
over the last decade or so. And I'm proud that we have that. And I feel like that is one of those intangible assets that we can also offer our students.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like a really, really healthy studio environment and,
Yeah.
that they're really lucky to have that. So,
Yeah, we're very happy about that.
yeah. And, so you also teach you coach at the Yale School of Music, and you also teach at the Curtis Institute. How do you balance the 3 schools, and how do they differ from each other?
It can be challenging, Katrina. I'm not gonna lie. It can be challenging because close though they are, New Haven, Philadelphia, and New York are three different cities, and so there's a certain amount of commuting to do. My quartet's residency, I guess you should call it, is at the Yale School of Music, and so we coach graduate students there. It's a part-time appointment, and so we go there, but we don't have to be there day in, day out. We make 2 to 3 trips a month, and we go and we, do a limited amount of coaching there, and we help run the Norfolk Chamber Music program in the summertime, and that's sort of what our residency consists of. And so, the duties are serious, but I would not say the duties are heavy there. And
Mm.
so that's one thing. At Curtis, Sidian and I teach 7 or 8 violists there. We love them. It's always such a treat to go down there. It is really a different feeling. I mean, I'm not going to give you a litany on the differences between, Curtis and Juilliard, because I mean, everyone knows about these places and
Mhm.
like everyone has heard things or has been to one or the other of them. But it's what you might imagine between like a really wonderful small school and a really wonderful big school.
Yeah.
The pluses and minuses loom larger for some students than for others. Curtis, on the whole, is a younger crowd as well as a smaller crowd. And there's a feeling when you go there, you really feel taken care of, I think. Philadelphia is beautiful and relatively quiet and a
Yes.
lovely place to be, and the school is comfortable if demanding, and
Yeah.
I get the feeling that the students are well taken care of there. Julia, the students are taken care of in a different way. I mean, there's enormous energy. It's an extremely organized place. Some people complain almost too organized, to the sense, in a sense that there's sort of a procedure for everything. But for a larger school, there kind of has to be.
Yeah.
Um, it also has like a very wide offering of opportunities. Like the HP program is so well developed at Juilliard, and so many of my students take secondary lessons in viola there. Like the new music opportunities and the chance to work with dancers and drama students is kind of a special thing, I would
Yeah.
say. And just the location of New York is also wonderful. So it's apples and oranges. It's what people get out of the two schools is really different, despite certain commonalities. And
Mhm.
I think the vast majority of people are glad that they went to one or the other.
Yeah.
You know, the student picks the school, but the school seems to pick the student too. Like
Oh,
you
yeah.
sort of find the place that's right for you, and that goes for every music school, I
Mhm.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And, you teach with your wife, Sinyan. What is that like, and how has navigating your marriage and teaching at the same schools and raising a family, how has that all been?
Well, maybe I should bring Sinyon in here, and you should ask her that question too, because I would say we have slightly different answers. I mean, to me, teaching is extremely central to my selfhood. I think it's become, as I've gotten older, it's become more and more important. And for me to feel like I'm giving young people support and guidance and like, being one of their people for like those years of their life, that's
Yeah.
so rewarding to me. And if I didn't have it, I'm not quite sure I would know who I was, at this
Mhm.
point. Um, and Sinyan is also a born teacher. She's a very gifted teacher and she loves it. But I like coming home at dinner and like talking about the students and making sure they're all okay and comparing notes with her. And sometimes she's kind of like, I love my students, but can I just be with you? And can we just like have a life separate from teaching? I love the teaching when I'm teaching. And sometimes I want, so
Interesting.
she's a
Yeah.
little bit more like, okay, there's, the work-life balance and that should be respected. Whereas I'm kind of a little bit like, did you notice blah, blah, blah was playing blah, 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 and
Right.
to me, they're part of my extended family, as they are for her too.
Yeah.
I think you sort of get the sense of what I'm saying.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm.
But it's really fun to teach with her because we have nearly identical values in what we want to hear in a
Mm.
performance, in a
Mhm.
student's performance, but we get at the problem solving with a very different lexicon and we express ourselves with very different words. And I think that has potential value because, like, if I swing and miss with a student trying to get something, Cindy might get the same thing by swinging and connecting.
I see.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like we always have two chances to solve a problem, like just because we present it in a slightly different light. And I think that I've noticed certain situations in which that's been beneficial. And
Mhm.
sometimes when I'm teaching a student by myself and I feel like it's not quite working as well as it could, I propose that we move to a share.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's had really good effect, a
Mhm.
really good result for a given student. And so it's a nice option to have.
Yeah.
It's funny. I will say that I think kind of for both of us, as we get older, we're starting to gravitate more and more towards teaching just by ourselves
Hmm.
and sharing less because, you know, let's face it, if you see the person at every lesson that they get, then you're really following the path with them and experiencing it very much kind of like alongside them
Yeah.
in a way that if you only see every other lesson, even if you share notes and even if you get lots of reports, there's something to be said about like that the two of you, the student and the teacher, you own the experience in common. And
Mhm.
I don't know, that's a special connection and it has its own benefits, which are like a little bit hard to quantify,
Yeah.
but are there. So I find myself I'm starting to gravitate more and more to just having my own students and maybe just the occasional share.
Yeah.
Somebody should write a book about it. You know,
Yeah.
sharing students versus teaching students solo.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll look for people who could write that book.
Yeah, yeah. It could be a good dissertation topic.
I'm sure they could get some information from you.
Yeah, sure.
That's great. I'm really glad you have that. And, how has your teaching philosophy changed over time and developed?
Well, I would say there's been one significant change, and that maybe has to do with my outlook on what a teacher is for. When I started as a young teacher, I would have friends who were also students, and they were like, well, my teacher, he's a good teacher, but sometimes he tries to get inside of my head, and I don't like that. And I was sort of kind of like, yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and like I don't like when they try to like mess with our brains and like psychoanalyze us. What's that about? And I determined as a young teacher, I was going to teach my students how to play the viola and how to interpret music because I felt that was what I was licensed to do.
Mhm.
And I thought it's very tempting as a teacher to talk to a student about their relationship or how their life is going. And that's none of my business. And I'm not a licensed therapist. And my job is to teach the viola and teach interpretation. And that's what I'm going to do because I know my business.
Right.
Turns out the truth is a little messier than that. And you can't just decide to do that. And in fact, even when you think that that's all you're doing, what the student is potentially getting from you is quite different from that. And quite recently, I finished with a student who I'd taught for 4 years as an undergraduate and then also through his master's.
Mhm.
And he said to me when we were kind of like having our goodbye time, which is always kind of emotional, he said, I really appreciate all the guidance you've given me violistically and musically and everything you've taught me about style and interpretation. And that's all been important. But he said, honestly, the most incredible thing I got from you is this sense. Once a week, I walked in and I felt like somebody I respected truly believed in me
Wow.
and truly believed in my ability to keep on doing this thing and keep on improving. And it wasn't something that I ever said to him, but he got that vibe, which I'm
Yeah.
very happy that he got that vibe. I didn't think I was mainly concentrating on that,
Mhm.
but this sort of unspoken thing, which I mean, what am I thinking? Of course, it's important to someone who's 22 years old and like you're at that point of peak anxiety where you're kind of like, how do I stack up? Can I make a living doing this? Am I
Mhm.
any good at all? The person you see and who's kind of like undertaking this enterprise with you once a week, how could it not be important? Right. And I kind of knew that, but I always assumed it was secondary.
Mm.
And now I realized that whether or not you sort of go there and like actually try to get inside their heads, you will get inside their heads and you better be a force for good if that's going to happen. And so that's been a big swing, maybe not in the way I go about teaching, but in my perception of what's actually happening
Mm.
in
Mhm.
what's important.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it's hard to be very demanding in this really difficult thing that we're all trying to learn to do, and yet to have the student walk away with, "Yeah, they have my back. They believe in me,"
Mhm.
Um, equally important. I don't think it works to be a teacher who's very demanding and says, "Maybe I believe in you. We'll see if you can get this or not."
Yeah.
That's not good enough.
Yeah. Mhm.
Right? So it has caused me to reframe like what it means to be a teacher. And
Yeah.
in a certain way, it sounds kind of obvious what I'm saying, but it was something that clicked just a few years ago for me and has been
Mhm.
a sort of a very important shift.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing and very inspiring, and your students are very lucky to have you.
Well, I'm lucky to have them.
Yes. Well, this has been such a great interview. Thank you so much. I always like to close with this one question. What advice do you have for aspiring professional musicians?
Well, maybe I'll answer that indirectly, which is, I'm definitely going to fall into platitudes here. So like advance warning. But the scenario is when very every so often a student will come and say, I'm not sure I should be a musician, or I'm not sure I have the desire to do this. How do I know if I should keep doing it or if I should think about doing something else? And the answer is, what happens if you wake up in the morning and ask yourself, I won't play the viola today or tomorrow or the day after that? And is that okay?
Mhm.
And if the answer is yes, or probably yes, then probably it is worth considering doing something else. If the answer is, wait a minute, I don't think I can do without that, then that's kind of proof positive that you need to keep persisting,
Yeah.
right? Persisting how? Like how to get good enough or how to get lucky enough or how to have enough tools to do what it is. I those are much murkier questions. And I would love to say that, if you do A, B, and C, then there is professional certainty for you. The much bigger question is not, can I get good enough to make a living? The question is, do I have the qualities or can I develop the qualities and abilities that will enable me to do something in music which will make me feel fulfilled?
Mhm.
And that could
Yeah.
be any number of things, or it could be a grab bag of quite a number of things. And I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, but I kind of feel that an important difference between the 20th century classical musician and the 21st century classical musician is that you have to be diverse
Mhm. Yeah.
in most cases. If you're the principal violist of the Chicago Symphony, you don't have to be that diverse.
Yeah.
Although it's still open to you to be, most other people have to be able to do, I would say, a number of things. They
Mhm.
have to be able to teach. They have to know something about different styles from crossover to HP to like a number of different things like that. They need to have a certain amount of entrepreneurship, probably. They
Mhm.
have to know maybe how to kickstart an organization of some kind, which is a whole other thing
Yeah.
involving writing grant proposals and
Yep.
becoming unincorporated, not for profit. I mean, and that's a lot. How are we supposed to do this when it takes us 4 years just to like get a handle on our viola playing?
Yeah.
Uh, it's a fraught question, and lots of people who run music schools are thinking about that day in, day out. Like, how do we balance our curriculum to best equip our our people to be able to thrive in the world? And but like,
Right.
how do we do that? Because the world's changing,
Mhm.
right? So conservatories are always in danger of becoming kind of museums.
Mm,
This
mhm.
is the education that would have worked 50 years ago, 75 years ago without it, right? So
Right.
it's a challenge for schools to evolve and to kind of keep up with the times.
Mhm.
At the same time, I think you might agree that students don't get the total of their knowledge and experience in music education inside the walls of their music school.
Oh, yeah.
You go out there and stuff happens that you couldn't possibly get in the classroom.
Mhm.
And so we teachers have to have faith that that will happen without our necessarily having to actively put it in place.
Mhm.
Um, stay curious, stay open minded, give yourself a chance to think, okay, I might not be doing the profession that I thought I was going to be doing 10 years ago. That's shifting and turning into something possibly more alluring or more exciting.
Mm,
But
mhm.
maybe nothing I dreamed of 5 years ago. And
Yeah.
maybe that's okay or even good.
Mhm.
Right. So, allow it to take shape around you and don't imagine that you can necessarily control all that much of it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is up to other people. A lot of it is up to random forces in
Mhm.
the universe. And so, like, to a certain extent, we have to keep on rolling and keep on having faith in ourselves and, trying to keep the anxiety demons at bay.
Yes.
It's easy to say, not easy to do.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, that's great advice. Thank you so much for all of your insight and inspiration. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Of course. Great talking to you, Katrina. Take care.
Thank you so much to Misha Amory for this incredible last interview of the first season of this podcast. I loved hearing his stories about the Brentano Quartet and the Nombre competition, and hearing him talk so thoughtfully and passionately about teaching the viola. Thank you all so much for listening and spreading the word about this podcast, and I'll see you all in 2 months for season 2 with more stories and interviews to share. Thank you so much for joining me on Backstage Classical Career Conversations. If you liked this interview, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on the platform you're using. You can follow us at Backstage Classical Podcast on Instagram or visit the website at backstageclassicalpodcast.com for more episodes and information. I'm Katrina Stroud, and it was great to see you here. Until next time, stay inspired and listen to the stories of others.